Welcome back to the Spector Creative channel, and we're doing a little bit of a heavier video today, but still about the toy industry, because I want to talk a little bit about cultural context and how culture and what's happening around a toy line and a toy brand very much affects its success and the interest of kids and eventually collectors. How kind of the sign of our times leads directly to whether or not a toy line is going to be a hit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of America's armed conflicts. Vietnam, the Cold War, I guess maybe that wasn't as much of an armed conflict as much as an economic one, and the war on terrorism that happened in the early part of this century. Now, a quick word, this is not a political video, but I do need to talk about history and I do need to talk about some armed conflicts because they had such an impact on culture. So I'm not trying to create conspiracy or create controversy. I'm just talking about history in the sense of America's armed conflicts. All right, so let's start with the basics. Especially for kids, there's a good guy and a bad guy, right? The good guy has a white hat, the bad guy has a black hat, and probably a mustache. And for most kids who grow up in the United States, they learn that America is a winner, that we win all of our wars, that we won freedom from England, from being colonies to a country, that we won World War I and we won World War II, and that whenever we get into an armed conflict, it is because we are defending freedom and we are helping to bring, well, I don't want to say joy, but we're helping to bring freedom to the world. And a lot of this started to change in the 60s and 70s because of things like Vietnam, like Nixon resigning. It sort of burst that bubble on, the American stigma of always being the winner every time.
Winners like North Vietnam? Shut up! We did not lose Vietnam. It was a tie.
Now again, this is not a video with commentary about the Vietnam War, and obviously there were good things and bad things, and there were atrocities committed. But what I want to talk about in regard to the Vietnam War is its effect on pop culture, and especially something like Star Wars. So George Lucas has been very upfront about what an influence the Vietnam War was on Star Wars as far as writing it. But it's not necessarily the point of view that many take. It was actually his protest movie. He was a child of the 50s and 60s, and much like a lot of people at that time who were protesting the war, and Star Wars was actually written to be a protest against the war. In fact, it's not even the movie he wanted to make. He wanted to make Apocalypse Now, or at least that movie came across his desk, but he passed on it in order to make Star Wars. But he still wanted to put a lot of those themes into it. And that's why in Star Wars you see very clear bad guys in monotone colors and very clear good guys in multiple colors. It's very easy to recognize who is good and who is bad. The ambiguity, is removed. And that bled over into the toy line as well, and it provided children with a very clear play pattern of good guy versus bad guy. All of the confusion of, who wins wars was removed because now we had a good guy who was going to win and a bad guy who was going to lose. Star Wars, both the film and the toy line, was absolutely a direct sort of, child of the Vietnam era and our involvement. And by giving us a clear hero to root for who did good, it helped children and adults cope with recent events. So let's look at the next sort of event in history, which was the Cold War between the US and Russia. So here we had a very clear sort of, adversary in the form of communist Russia versus democratic United States. So it wasn't as ambiguous, there we go, see I said it correctly, as the Vietnam War and the 1960s and, a lot of events that preceded it. And so because of that, you saw entertainment and toy lines that were reflecting the mood of the country where America was in the right and was great and was a winner again. And, we had a clear enemy this time to go against. And it wasn't just G.I. Joe. It was also almost all of the hit toy lines. I mean, Optimus Prime, right? We think of him as a robot, but have you ever noticed how red, white, and blue he looks? There's a reason he was chosen as the main good guy, or even Masters of the Universe. Look at how American USA red, white, and blue the logo and the branding is. It's very American colors.
You think that's air you're breathing now?
Yeah, it's like once you look at it, you can't unsee it. In fact, there's actually an episode of Transformers, and I wish I could have found this clip, where one of the kids on the show, and this is the original Transformers, says something about, wow, Optimus Prime is so brave and courageous, he would make a great president. I remember seeing that episode and that line just sticking in my head. I wish I could find the clip for this video. I'm sure someone in the comment section will point out exactly which episode and what the timestamp is. But yes, I mean, there's a reason Optimus Prime was chosen as the good guy leader. And it wasn't just, robots that were big in the 80s with kids, but it was also muscle men. And again, this was because it was symbolic of how strong the United States was being projected to children and in culture, being set up as the adversary to communism. And really, one hero that showed this a lot was Rambo. While he started off as an anti-Vietnam character, in the sequels that came out in the 80s, he was very much recast and rewritten as a pro-democracy, anti-Russian, muscle-bound hero who is here to save the world. In fact, the same actor also went up directly against Russia in the boxing ring. And kind of funny how the actor playing the Russian there ironically went on to eventually play He-Man as well. But it all just shows how much giant muscular heroes were part of the 80s. And this is because the country really needed to be built up and be strong again after everything that happened with Vietnam and the Nixon resignation. We were feeling weak, and it reflected in our toys. I mean, we even had toys called Muscle. This is not, an isolated event or coincidence. The country and likewise children with their play needed to feel strong again after, if you will, not always winning every war the way we're taught. I mean, He-Man's bad guy's a skeleton, which is a sign of weakness. And as I said earlier, absolutely, Transformers and He-Man was a symbol of America in the sense that look at the red, white, and blue right there on his outfit and his sword. It's not a coincidence. It's very deliberate. You can see it in the branding. I mean, obviously, unlike G.I. Joe, he wasn't manifest and directly shown as being an American soldier, but you can see it. All right, so let's fast forward to another event, if you will, the War on Terror that started with the destruction of the two towers in New York. And again, I'm not getting into politics or conspiracy theories or anything like that. I just want to talk about direct history and really history of armed conflict. So this War on Terror took place on many fronts and didn't have a direct enemy in the terms of one country. There was really a question in popular culture about who is the enemy. We weren't just going against Russia, or we weren't going against Britain. And the answer to this was Lord of the Rings. And the reason Lord of the Rings did so well, I mean, obviously it was a very well done movie, but it also presented a very clear good guy versus bad guy motif that was needed. Much like with Vietnam, the start of the War on Terror left us needing a hero. We didn't have a direct enemy. It wasn't, Russia with communism that we were fighting in the Cold War in the 80s. It was now very unclear. So having a very specific hero like Luke Skywalker, we now had Frodo Baggins to root for. All right, so what is the point of all of this? Why am I going into all of this history when the video is usually about toys? Well, it's because toys are a reflection on what is happening in culture. And toys do exist within those limitations. They don't just, work forever. It's like the perfect example is the 1950s with Davy Crockett. So what's happening in the world is reflected in entertainment, in movies, in song, in TV, and in toys. Toys are a form of entertainment. They are a form of entertainment for children who play and for collectors who collect. It is a form of recreation. And what is happening in the world directly affects the way children play, much as in 2020 when the world was shut down and children were denied playgrounds and socialization, and the fact that so many kids are on screens now instead of actively playing with each other and having interaction. This is getting younger and younger, and it's going to have an effect for their entire lives and generations to come. Play is so important. We're always going to have adult collectors who have nostalgia for the toys they grew up as a child. But expecting kids to sort of be into brands that succeeded during their parents' generation is sometimes a fallacy, because these brands succeeded because they were a product of their time. After the 1970s, we needed to feel like there was a clear definition of who was good and who was bad. In the 80s, we needed to feel super strong in order to fight the Cold War. And later on in the 2000s, we also again needed a clear idea of who was a good guy and who was a bad guy. So new brands, well, or rather old brands brought back, they do exist within a vacuum, because the way they were, when they were created, the cultural context is a direct link to their success. Toys are entertainment, and entertainment is directly related to current events. So if a brand is going to succeed, it's important that it reflects what's happening in the world today. The political, the cultural, the entertainment. That's how to make better toys, is to have them be a reflection on what people need from recreation. Do they need an escape? Do they need a definition of good versus evil? Whatever they need, toys can provide this as a form of recreation, and that's how toy lines can be better. All right, I know this was a heavier one. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments below, and I'll always answer them. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing and liking and ringing the bell and all those things. I'll see you guys in the next video.